Jai Bhim, Jai Mulwasi. Welcome you all to MNT News Network. Today is Sunday and it's time for a special prime time session in English. Today we have with us a very special and distinguished guest with us. We have none other than Dr. Christophe Jaffrelot with us today. He's a well-known French political scientist, research director at the CERI-Sciences, professor of Indian politics and sociology at the King's College London. Apart from the galaxy of important books on Indian politics and his recent book, Modi's India, Hindu Nationalism and the Rise of Ethnic Democracy has been much discussed nowadays. And we have also met him on a number of occasions as a columnist in the Indian Express and the Caravan. It gives me immense pleasure to have with us Dr. Christophe today with us. And we are going to interact with him on the topic, Hindu nationalism movement and Indian politics. Before we proceed, I request you to share this important video on Facebook and YouTube. Do like, comment, and share this video with all your friends and the personal people you know. And please do comment in the chat box also. Now, I would like to welcome our most distinguished guest. He has been studying and keenly observing South Asian politics for more than 3 decades. His intellectual commitment to this particular subject, backed by extensive empirical data and first-hand experience, will definitely provide valuable inputs to the viewers today. He will enlighten us on the subject Hindu nationalist movement in India. Sir, I welcome you to MNT News Network. Welcome.
Thank you.
It's a great privilege to have you amongst us on MNT News Network. Sir, you are a regular visitor of India, and for the last 30 years, you have been associated with all this work, and you have been studying the South Asian politics, and especially India and Pakistan. And you have been taking note of all the developments which are taking place in this particular area. You have you have authored number of books on the Hindu nationalist movement, the caste system, the subaltern movement, democracy, and many other subjects we have tackled. Considering your extensive work in this field of the especially the South Asian studies, especially India and Pakistan, I would like to ask you a very important question. What was it that triggered that you developed interest in this particular subject, and you made this subject your area of expertise? Would like to know what inspired you to carry on this intellectual journey.
Well, it's an old story now because it started when I was 18. When I was studying philosophy, I had a philosophy teacher who was very well versed in Indian philosophies, including Buddhism, Sufism, Hinduism. And I read extensively on these domains, in these different perspectives. And when I joined my university, the Sciences Po, that is specializing in political science, I had to find intersection between this interest and my studies. So I worked first on the social religious reform movement, Brahmo Samaj especially, that took place in the 19th century. And I traveled to India 2 years later, when I was 20 for the first time in 1984. And at that time, you may remember the Ayodhya movement was just beginning. That was the very beginning of the Ayodhya movement. And I found my interest in history, of course, a bit, well, if you want, unimportant compared to what was at stake in the street at that time. So I decided to work on the rise of Hindu nationalism, on the history of Hindu nationalism, and I focused on the Sangh Parivar, and I did my fieldwork primarily in Madhya Pradesh, Madhya Bharat, if you prefer, even western part of Madhya Pradesh. So that's how I did my PhD, and subsequently, because of my fieldwork among Hindutva followers, I discovered the key role of caste, caste being a subtext of Hindutva in many ways. And therefore, I started to work on the backward caste organizations, OBCs, and that was right after VP Singh had announced the implementation of the Mandal Committee report 1990. I discovered, especially after listening to VP Singh's speech on December 2, 1989, Baba Saheb Ambedkar, and read extensively the collected works of Baba Saheb Ambedkar that the Maharashtra government was producing at that time. It was the beginning. And I wrote a biography of Baba Saheb Ambedkar that was published in French first, 21 years ago, and then in English, and then in Hindi, and then in Tamil, and it will be published in Marathi this year, and in Gujarati very soon. Then I was alarmed by what was going on the minorities front. So I decided to focus more on the Muslims, and we did a research with a team of my colleagues, on Muslims in Indian cities, and that became a book called Muslims in Indian Cities. But last but not least, as you've just mentioned, I've returned to the Hindu nationalist movement, and my work at the moment is on Modi's India. And the book I've just published is the first volume in a series. The next volume will be on Modi's Gujarat, and I'll return to Gujarat, where I've done fieldwork for 20 years now, because it's the laboratory. So in a nutshell, this is my intellectual trajectory.
Okay, it's very inspiring that you started your journey at a very tender age, very young age, and you are keenly and very closely associated with all the developments which are taking place in this country. And apart from the right wing forces that may be the RSS and the BJP and the OBC, you have also done extensive work amongst the SC/ST OBCs also, and they form the 85% of the people of this country, and they form a big chunk. And in spite of being such a large number, they are not able to make an impact on the political scenario of this country. What is the reason? For example, we can take that castes are mutually repulsive. What is your observation? And we would like to know these things from your empirical study and first-hand information.
Well, I see two reasons mostly. The first one is divisions between OBCs, within OBCs, and divisions within Dalits. You know, it's exactly what Baba Saheb Ambedkar said so many decades ago. There is a caste system within the caste system. There are caste hierarchies within OBCs, within Dalits, what Baba Saheb Ambedkar called graded inequality. So within the Dalits, you have, for instance, in Uttar Pradesh, Jatavs, Bangis, Kartiks, so many others. They don't join hands easily. And in fact, when one of the groups is benefiting from reservations, the others are alienated, are resentful and can be easily co-opted. And if you see so many Dalit supporting BJP in Uttar Pradesh, for instance, it's largely because they come from these caste groups, the Bangis, Katiks, Pasis, which have been resentful of the rise of Jatavs. So Jatavs are behind BSP, the others are behind BJP, and the result is that there is no Dalit politics worth that name in Uttar Pradesh. That's one explanation. Another explanation has to do with Sanskritization. You know, this notion of Sanskritization that has been introduced by the Indian anthropologist M.N. Srinivas many years ago remains very relevant. And it designates the imitation of the upper caste by Dalits, by OBCs. The mechanisms at work are very similar within Dalits and within OBCs, really. And to imitate the Brahmin makes the Dalits and OBCs very vulnerable to co-option. So among the groups I have just mentioned before, Balmikis, for instance, the craze for Sanskritization makes them almost non-committed to Ambedkarism. And what I've just said about the Dalits can be replicated in the case of the OBCs, you know, divisions and Sanskritization. That works in a very parallel manner, you know. Again, the example of Uttar Pradesh is very revealing. Yadavs will be supporting Samajwadi Party, but non-Yadav OBCs, including Kurmis, Lodis, so many others, will resent the way Yadavs are cornering reservations, are rising to power, and therefore are likely to be co-opted by BJP. And BJP is very good at giving tickets to candidates coming from these groups. So these two, divisions and Sanskritization, are, I think, the first reasons why you don't see the plebeians rising to power, except on some rare occasions, like the Mondal moment. But that's a very, very brief moment of unity.
Okay, sir. This is all due to the process of Sanskritization, and that's why the division is there. This is your analysis. Sir, you just spoke about the volumes which are going to come about Modi's India. And this government is often referred to as the Modi government. Please comment on the Modi government's commitment to the constitutional values which we have cherished.
Well, on the paper, the Modi government bows to the Indian constitution. And this constitution has not been amended so far, except marginally, well, at least except for one article, Article 370. But in practice, some of the values enshrined in this constitution are not observed the way they used to be observed. You know, in the preamble of this constitution, there is this concept of secularism that is referring to old ethos, the oldest ethos probably of the Indian civilization, something you would find with Emperor Ashoka, Akbar, and of course the founding fathers of the Indian democracy, Babasaheb Ambedkar, Jawaharlal Nehru. And this notion of secularism is the state will recognize all communities, religious communities, as equal. on a power. Well, that found expression in many symbolic practices, including, just to give you an example, the iftar parties, which were in a way parallel to visits to temples, all kinds of temples, including gurudwaras, of course, including Tirupati, including places of worship. And similarly, the Dargah culture, the Sufi places, were visited by all kinds of prime ministers in the course of history. Well, this is not the case anymore. This is just an example, very small example. But when you seize iftar parties, and when, on the contrary, the Prime Minister of India is himself laying the foundation stone of the Ayodhya temple, he is not observing secularism the way the founding fathers of India had enshrined it in the Constitution of India. But there would be many other examples, and I'm sure we'll return to that in the conversation.
Okay, sir. I have referred to some of your videos and talks also on many occasions. And you have said that though the political ideology of the RSS is very limited or very sectarian, in spite of that, they seem to be growing, and they are occupying most of the place in the public discourse, and they are influencing the psychology of the masses at large. And the RSS is the mother organization of this present government. You have spoken with the top leaders of the RSS on one-to-one basis, and you know all these things. And nowadays, there is a phenomenon also called as saffron modernity. I would just like to know from you whether this very limited world view of the RSS to convert this secular democratic republic into a Hindu Rashtra, compatible with the ideals of the constitution. How will you comment on this?
No, of course, it's not compatible. And the idea of secularism is not compatible with the idea that one religion is bound to prevail over others. But this is what's going on in practical terms, and there is hardly any resistance because minorities are not very well placed for resisting this transformation. So the resistance, if any, can only come from the majority community. And the real question for me is how far has Hindutva now somewhat colonized the mind of the majority to such an extent that this is the only game in town, this is the only legitimate ideology. And to some extent, a point of no return might have been reached. And for many reasons, the fear of the other, the fear of Pakistan, the fear of Islamists, the fear of Muslims. And also because of the groundwork of the Sangh Parivar. Never forget that this is an organization that is almost 100 years old. And there is no other example in the world of an organization that has grown for 100 years in such a way that it is not patronized by the state. It was not, at least, recently patronized by the state, and still it grew, it diversified. It's not only the RSS shakas and their huge network, it's also ABVP, BMS, BKS, all these unions, all these offshoots of RSS, which are penetrating society and transforming the identity of Hindus. So there is a risk that India becomes a majoritarian democracy, an ethnic democracy, a democracy where minorities would become second-class citizens. And the only antidote to that can come from within the Hindu uh, community itself, where at some point, possibly, socioeconomic issues, uh, caste considerations, regional identities may stage a comeback. But for the moment, we don't see this happening in such a way that the hegemonic discourse can be somewhat countered. And of course, that has much to do also with the media, with crony capitalism, but I'm sure we'll return to these dimensions.
So many times it is said that the concept of secularism is more concerned with the security of the minorities, but in practice, sec, uh, secularism is more important to the common masses of this country, who should free themselves from the shackles of this traditional orthodox religion. So why we are not able to convince the common masses that secularism is more important for them rather than the protection of the minority? What is the role of the elite class or the intellectual class of this particular community? Why they are not able to convince these people, the common masses?
Well, you may say that education and the role of the intellect is not necessarily the most critical variable. I'm not at all convinced that the more educated you are, the more secular you are. I think at the grassroots levels, in village India in particular, the capacity of people to live together, to cultivate a kind of multi religious atmosphere was more than among the educated middle class, because the educated middle class is in fact largely responsible for the rise of Hindutva. And I think for two reasons. One has to do with identity politics, to get an identity in spite of modernization, in spite of urbanization. You want to stick to your Hindu roots, to your traditional identity. So there is a kind of transformation of this identity into something that is much more nationalistic, much more monolithic. And secondly, the urban middle class comes mostly from upper caste. And the subtext of the Hindutva rise to power for me is, if you want, upper caste revenge. It's a post-Mandal development. For many years, between 1990 and 2014, we've seen Mandal 1, we've seen Mandal 2, we've seen the rise of OBCs and Dalits. The BSP phenomenon, when Mayavati took over in 2007, of course, the Kanshiram phenomenon. I interviewed Kanshiram in 1996. It was absolutely fascinating to see that he was in the sense of history. He was at last making, in a way, the dream of Ambedkar a reality. Well, the quotas, reservations, the fact that you had now low caste parties coming up at the state level almost everywhere in the belt, the fact that you had OBC chief ministers almost everywhere also. In 2012, 2013, you had very few upper caste chief ministers left, even by the way, out of the indie belt. So there was a need for a reaction, and the upper caste middle class used Hindutva as an antidote to caste politics. Forget about your caste. Think about your identity as a Hindu first. You're a Hindu first and foremost. And the other is the Muslim, is the Christian. The idea was to reunify the Hindus behind BJP. And mind you, when you look at the social profile of BJP, when you look at the social profile of Modi's government in 2014, in 2019, it's upper caste dominated. You have a real comeback. Upper caste have staged a comeback in Indian politics in the wake of this Modi wave, and that was the objective. That was the game, the aim at least, and it worked.
Sir, in 2003, you had authored a book that is a silent revolution, and it was much discussed in our organizational structure also, this book. You have done extensive work about the BSP, the OBC uprising, and all these things. And you might be knowing about BAMSEF, the Backward and Minority Communities Employees Federation. And right now, we have also started the People's Party of India Democratic 2 years ago, 3 years ago. And we form the SC, ST, OBC people form the 85% of the population of this country. And what are the ways to bring back the lost glory in the political field and other cultural field? Is there any solution in view? Is there any hope for remaining to come back to the previous times or to regain the lost glory?
Well, there is always hope, of course. The solution, as I said, lays primarily in unity, because divisions are undermining the OBC politics and if you want, the plebeians politics at large. But in addition to unity, I would mention the need for a socio-economic agenda. I think that the only way to move forward is to have an alternative agenda to identity politics. And this alternative agenda probably needs to be rooted in socio-economic issues. More equality in terms of access to jobs, where discrimination is rampant. A socio-economic, you can say even a social-democratic agenda against privatization. We've seen how the COVID pandemics has revealed the absence of public health services worth that name. And of course, the poor are the most badly affected when privatization of health results in almost the inaccessibility of doctors, of hospitals, and so on. But these are the issues around which those who have been marginalized can rally and build an alternative on the basis of such considerations. It's possibly the right time for this, but the kind of hegemonic power that is in place will make this battle very difficult, very long, and not necessarily winnable.
The situation is really difficult for us because we cannot predict anything on a very concrete basis. So though we have seen the rise of Hindutva politics and Hindu nationalism, we have seen all these things. It's a subject of your extensive study. With the help of constitutional values, what are the ways to counter the upsurge of this kind of nationalism, like composite nationalism or the nationalism which is expected which is enshrined in the Constitution of India?
Precisely. This is where this constitution is a blueprint of the alternative agenda. Everything is there. This is a marvelous constitution. The multicultural rights, the rights for minorities, linguistic minorities, religious minorities are there. The call for equality, socioeconomic development is there. Directive principles and fundamental rights are charters of socioeconomic development. So, to be true to these values should be sufficient. To implement these values should be sufficient. Now, when it does not happen, of course, you can mobilize politically and even in the street and demonstrate. But clearly, it's not so easy. And we saw that the anti-CA movement finally could not survive. So you have another, I would say, solution to explore. And that is the rule of law. And there is no better body than the Supreme Court for making the Constitution alive. And that's probably one of the institutions that needs to be lobbied. They need to be true to their values, to their mandate, because they, at the end of the day, are the custodian of the values that are enshrined in the Constitution. How can the judiciary perform its duties is something everybody should focus more upon, and not resign oneself to the fact that, well, for the first time in the war, since the emergency, since the 70s, the Supreme Court is not opposing, is not confronting the executive the way it should. That's one of the, I would say, solutions I would highlight, I would emphasize.
Let us hope so, because we have a new Chief Justice of India, and his opening statements were quite what we can encouraging, because we had totally lost hope as far as the previous Chief Justice of India was concerned. And as far as the judiciary is not representative, and we are pushing for it to be becoming more and more representative, and hope this thing takes place. And as you have said, definitely the role of the Supreme Court as the custodian of the Constitution and the protector of the fundamental rights of the citizens is very important. And in the similar way, the coming elections of 2024 are also very important for the people who believe in the Constitution, the constitutional values. And but many times we have seen that the leaders who are in the political fields, they are not taking proactive steps. They are taking the steps when many things come to a halt. So what proactive steps need to be taken by the Bahujan leaders, take into consideration the 2024 elections?
Well, the Dalit parties have always been badly affected by several factors. One, lack of resources. These are among the poorest political parties always. Who gives money to Dalit parties? Certainly not the businessmen who have nothing to expect in return. So that's one first difficulty, problem that can only be surmounted if people contribute. And that was the philosophy of BAMSAFE. When I talked to Kanchiram so many years ago, he said that's how we did it. We had, and you know that, of course, we asked those who have a safe job, who have been employed by the government, who have benefited from reservations. We asked them to contribute financially, and of course by giving some of their time also to the cause. So that's uh, one of the I would say necessary conditions, not a sufficient condition, but a necessary condition to increase the resources. The second necessary condition, I repeat, is unity. And for unity to prevail, the need is to have an agenda where people will find something for them. And that's why socioeconomic programs, welfare program, welfarist, in fact, program, should be drafted and publicized. And last but not least, a third condition has to do with organization. You remember Baba Saheb Ambedkar's motto: educate, mobilize,
Agitate, organize.
agitate, organize, And that's something that parties could never achieve in a sustainable manner, in a sustained manner. Even Baba Saheb Ambedkar's parties, the ILP, the SCF, the RPI, were short-lived. They were not cadre-based parties, never. They relied on his personality. Similarly, BSP has relied on one personality and is paying very dear for that, because that's
Yeah.
not the way democratic parties work. That's not the way you mobilize people in a sustainable manner. So the third condition is an organization that is truly democratic, in which people would invest their time as cadres and collegially, in a collegial manner. That is not easy to build in 3 years. This is not at all something you achieve so quickly. All the more so as, never forget that there are people who are spending most of their time dividing the opposition. And politicians are for sale, always. So to divide the opposition is very easy when you can just blackmail or bribe MLAs or MPs and make them defect from their original party. But BSP has been plagued by defectors with defectors continuously. So the three conditions have to be fulfilled, plus one: resist those who will try to hijack this route to power. This is very challenging.
Yes, definitely, it's very challenging. The division amongst the people who want to change and the unity of the people who want to maintain the status quo. This is the very important aspect which you have highlighted. And it's definitely a lesson for the people who want change, that they should keep the differences away and try to forge a greater unity, take into consideration the future challenges which they are facing. Sir, so you have written extensively on various subjects and very fundamental research you have done on various subjects. Were you able to influence the policies of the government, that maybe your native country or the country of your study, that is India? Can you elaborate some examples?
Well, it's difficult for a scholar to assess the, I would say, concrete impact it can have on decision makers. But what we do is to create an intellectual atmosphere, to inform. That's one work that has made some impact. Very difficult to give concrete results of this, but I am absolutely certain that by informing the decision makers, and I keep doing it with, I would say, notes, interviews. We do help. We do make the decision makers aware of what is the context, what is at stake. And secondly, we make them realize that we know about their mischiefs. They know that we know, and that we will tell, and that we will expose. You know, that's not a direct influence. It's again an indirect influence, but it's a very important one. We testify, we write, we expose, we call a spade a
Definitely.
spade.
Definitely, you know what the mischiefs these policy makers are doing, and you know they know that you know their mischief. That is a very important, and that's definitely a check and balance on these politicians. Sir, I would just like to point. I would just like to elaborate or just tell you a few names. That may be Amartya Sen, that may be Thomas Piketty, and after gauging the after I have come to know that these people they are influencing the political parties of India as far as the poverty reduction is concerned, or the education is concerned, or the inequalities are concerned.
Yeah.
Please comment on whether how are you probably you are associated with all these thinkers, and how you look towards all these developments.
You know,
And
certainly,
the problem.
I've worked, yeah, I've worked with these people, and of course, in France, we work with Thomas Piketty. We have done some research together, and in fact, recently also with um, the study of inequalities is one of the studies that is very dear to me. And with Thomas Piketty, we studied, for instance, the way Muslims were lagging behind more and more. You know, the way they are losing ground socioeconomically. But it's much easier for economists than for political scientists to do this kind of surveys and to exert this kind of influence. My work is more political. I'm more looking at political institutions, geopolitical developments. In fact, this is probably where you can see the more direct influence of political scientists. For instance, today we speak a lot about the Indo-Pacific. How far is the Indo-Pacific the new strategy of the West, of my government, of the EU, European Union? So we have started an observatory of the Indo-Pacific, and we interview people from the region, from India, from Japan, from Australia, to precisely present my government and other governments with a view from the country itself, from the countries itself. That's the kind of information that scholars can provide. And I think it's also very important because, you know, from a distance, you somewhat anticipate reactions which are not necessarily relevant. The kind of vision Europe has of the Indo-Pacific is not necessarily the kind of vision India has of the Indo-Pacific. So this is where we have the role of being intermediaries, hyphens in a way. But similarly, I have started another observatory, Observatory of the Indian Democracy. All this is online, by the way. It's very easy to Google and find all these websites, and they are all in English. So this Observatory of the Indian Democracy is another way to testify. Now, we are interviewing people who are close to the Bhima Koregaon accused, and we ask them, tell us who they are, what were they doing before going to jail. Because in the West especially, people don't know. People don't know who is Anantel Tumbe. People don't know who is Arun Ferreira. People don't know who is Gautam Navlaka and who was Father Stan Swami. So to build an archive to testify to make information available, I think is part of our job. We are scholars. It's a scholarly work based on facts, based on data that we interpret along according to some theories. But the theories in that particular case are less important than the empirical material. And hopefully it helps. Hopefully it makes. At least they can't say we did not know. And this is our role. Nobody will be able to say we did not know. We did not know who was Father Stansamy. Yes, you did. And if you did not do anything, it's for other reasons, not ignorance. And I think it's a very important role that the intellectuals play to dispel the excuse of not knowing. Now, this is exactly what Bertolt Brecht said. Bertolt Brecht, as you know, was this German theater person who was anti-fascist, anti-Nazi in the 30s, 40s. And he said, I'm not writing for making things change today. I'm writing to make sure that you will not be in a position to say, I did not know. And you should be ashamed. I'm writing for making you ashamed. Well, it's partly something the scholars are doing. It's not the whole story, but it's part of the story.
Definitely, the role of scholars like you is very important to bring forth the truth to the people and make people realize the facts which are there, and they cannot take the excuse that they don't know. It's very important, sir. Sir, as far as Hindutva nationalism is concerned, vis-a-vis the directive principle of state policies, in which the idea of welfare state is enshrined, will this concept of welfare state take a great beating in the Hindutva nationalist plan?
Well,
What will be the fate of this welfare state?
it's a very good question. It's a very good question. In my book, I have a chapter on this, and I've called it well-being versus welfare state, because on the Hindutva side, they do not indulge in welfarist programs. This is what we saw in the previous decades. NRAGA, for instance, was part of a social democratic welfare-oriented program. And you all remember that Narendra Modi considered that it was a disaster, that this program should have gone. But it stayed, interestingly, because you can't do without it. But what they have emphasized as their own inventions, as their own creations, are Swachh Bharat, Jandal Yojana, Ujjwal Yojana, and these are not welfare-oriented. They are what I call well-being oriented. Well-being in the sense that Narendra Modi, during his Man Ki Baat program, can tell the poor, look, I'm doing something for you. And it's for your dignity. It's a dignity-oriented program. I recognize that you need something concrete for me. It cannot be money. It should not be money. He has a different take on it. It's a symbolic recognition of the dignity, the self-esteem of the poor. Well, I think this is going out of stream because you need more than one-shot cylinder gas. You need the money to refill it. You need more than a bank account and the plastic card. You need some money on this account. So the strategy of emphasizing symbolic gestures may be running out, and maybe, as you said, we will see some welfare state-oriented program staging a comeback, public hospital, public health, education, midday meals. We know what works. We know what has worked. NRAGA. We saw poverty reduction working because of this program. And today, poverty is increasing, not only because of COVID. The NSS survey that leaked in 2019 showed that the percentage of the poor had increased between 2012 and 2018, before the COVID crisis, and largely because some of these programs had stopped or had been reduced. So if emotions, if identity politics does not prevail fully, naturally these issues should stage a comeback, and naturally, yes, a welfare state may become again the objective, and you may at last fight against poverty, for sure, informality. So many people are living in the informal sector and surviving more than anything else in the informal sector. But there is so much to do. And at the same time, inequalities are increasing because the richest become richer. And this gap has been even increased because of the COVID crisis that has created so many new poor. If you look at the Pew survey, that is completely, I would say, impressionistic. I don't think it's as good as NSS. Nothing can be as good as NSS, but NSS is not working anymore. So you have to fall back on surveys like this one. The last Pew survey shows that the COVID crisis has created 75 million new poor. People who were middle class or lower middle class have become poor. It means that to do something for the poor, to relaunch anti-poor program should be a priority. So whether that works and that happens or not remains to be seen.
Your observation reminds me of the future of democracy. If democracy has to survive in India, there should be equality in the society, and there should be the difference between the economic position of the people should be minimized. And that is, I heard some of your videos, and in that video, you have given an example of Sweden. That in Sweden was a very unjust society once, but now it has become a very just society, and equality is more seen in Sweden. That is the only hope. And with this, I would like to uh, uh, ask you for the concluding remarks and a message to the organization, to the intellectual people of the Bahujan Samaj for their future.
Well, I've already said many things, so I will add only one thing briefly. When you see what Babasaheb Ambedkar did, what Kanshiram did, you see how people who have benefited from the system, from education, from reservations, and who, in spite of benefiting from the system, have spent their life for those who had not benefited yet. And I think this is the message. The message is, of course, you can enjoy socioeconomic upward mobility, but by forgetting those who have not yet risen socioeconomically, you somewhat betray these founding fathers of the plebeians. And I think to commit oneself to help those who are lagging behind, the children of the ghetto, as Ambedkar used to say, is certainly something that everybody can do. And you don't need to spend all your life and spend all your money. No, only a fraction of it, only a fraction of your time and a fraction of your money. And of course, by remembering those who have initiated this path, who are getting a little bit forgotten these days, but who are really sources of inspiration. Yeah, that is the only thing I would add.
Definitely, sir. This reminds me of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, who was able to speak one-to with the intellectual giants at that time. That may be the Round Table Conference, the Southborough Commission, or that may be any commissions which he faced. That may be his knowledge about the constitution or the federal structure. All these things, we know everything, and this creates a hope. And after looking at you, after talking with you, after having interaction with you, all your intellectual journey inspires us, that and it creates hope in our minds. And this underlines the importance of scholarship which we have to develop in the society. And unless and until we are not able to do this, we cannot challenge the system the way the elite people from the Bahujan Samaj should have done. In the same way, you have reminded us of the educated classes, the people who have taken the benefit of the reservation policy and who have become affluent, and in spite of that, they are working for the people who are less privileged or who are left behind. And that is a very important thing. The same thing we have been doing for many years together as far as our organization PAMSIF is concerned. And we should take the initiation, and we should try to give our most. We are blessed people, and we should try to change the system for a more egalitarian society. Thank you very much. We had a very nice talk. It was very inspiring, and for the future generations, you are definitely a very glaring example of scholarship, a glaring example of commitment, a glaring example of the commitment to basic human values. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Vinod, and thank you, Ashish, for this invitation.
Thank you, sir.